So I live out in LA, and here we are in New York, and I'm reminded just up the road a piece is Syracuse, where I spent some of my undergraduate life. And when I applied to the school, they didn't tell me one of the nicknames for it is Sibyracuse. And it gets very cold in the winter, very dark. And so while I was there, I turned to a cheap form of entertainment. They would show classic movies that hadn't been in the movie theater for a long time. And one of them was 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I'm curious, we're going to do it old school. I know we've got new technology out there, but just by a sound of applause, how many of you have ever seen the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey? All right. Good, good. Well, there's a terrific scene in the beginning of the movie that captures a cognitive leap, a moment when early man Australopithecus in all his hairy glory looks at objects and turns them into tools and sends mankind on an interesting arc. Let's take a look at a 90-minute clip of that. 90 seconds. So what I love about that clip, first of all, it was a magical media moment for me because it not only changed my mood, it changed my mind about science, about film, about the future. But it also captures an interesting trajectory of where we've gone with our own consciousness, these models of consciousness. We start off very primitive, very archaic, very instinctual, and that's how we see the world. And then as human beings, we get a little more advanced, and we start using our cognitive abilities, and we recognize that, wait a second, there are magical things going on out there. We don't understand them, but we know that something is occurring. We see that the sun arcs more slowly in the sky. We don't know why it happens. We don't know that the Earth is tilted on its axis. But we recognize when that happens, that magical change. New plants arrive, new animals arrive, and we can use that magical insight to thrive and do better. And as mankind expands its thinking, we go from archaic to magical to mythical. We gain more power over our own destiny. We don't have to wait for the crops to grow, the food to grow. We can plant them. We don't have to wait for the animals to come around. We can domesticate them. And so we started to change the stories that we would tell. We would still tell archaic stories that appeal to our most primitive selves. We would tell magical stories where we don't know what's going on, but we make up cool, fanciful things. But now we start to tell mythical stories where we are the protagonist. We have power to shape our own destinies, to fight what might go on, and to try and uncover what is going on out there. Now, the biggest change, of course, happens 500 years ago with the introduction of the scientific method. And this kind of thinking doesn't allow us to do mythical, magical, or archaic thinking. It has to be off and on its own. It's its own little bubble. And that's great. And that powers us to where we are right now, and that powers us from hitting a bone against an animal to launching a spacecraft. But my worry, my crisis, what keeps me up at night, is the idea that as we develop more powerful, more complex, more expensive, rational scientific tools of research, we're going to be a lot like the man who was looking for his keys underneath the street lamp. Not because that's where he lost his keys, but because the light's better there. And so as we get these new tools, we start saying, let's use these tools to look at this problem. And in fact, we're looking at rational problems. But I would argue that the keys, the insights, the really cool stuff is out there in the dark, where we left our keys somewhere. It's in the irrational moments. And any of us who have been in a relationship, been married, raised kids, dealt with coworkers, know humans are messy, complicated individuals. We are not always rational. We engage in all sorts of mythical, magical, and archaic kind of thinking. And so we've got to figure out, how do we get to those insights? How do we uncover that? And I'm going to share with you 3 different ideas, 3 different approaches that we've been taking. One of them is with big data to help us get to magical connections between when a media message and the audience are connected. Another is with mobile technology that allows us to get a more intimate look at how people are thinking and feeling, the mood that they are in, and map that mood to the media they're consuming. And then finally, look at some facial recognition, which gets at and gets beyond the cognitive rational response of individuals and gets directly to what they're feeling at a very granular moment in time, when we can see and witness the shift of mood from one state to another and know precisely when it happened and why it happened. So the first of these is an opportunity to look at big data. What we did here, we have a project with Nielsen called Nielsen Buyer Insights, where we've gone and we've used a single source of data and we've combined Nielsen viewing behavior, the currency that we use in the TV industry, with consumer spending in a variety of categories, in travel, in mobile, in department store, in entertainment. And what we've done is we've concentrated on that top 1/3 of customers, because those top 1/3 of customers account for 80% of sales. And to give an example of how this data is being used, so for example, a show like Modern Family has similar ratings to show X when it's just look at adults 18 to 49, and that's all good. But in fact, when you use the prism of top spenders, in this instance, department store spending, you can see that the number of people that we reach is actually close to double what the other show might have. And so it is the ability to take single source data and to connect that magical moment. And we've all experienced that when you're flipping through a newspaper, when you're scrolling through your iPad, when you're flipping through the channels, and you come across a commercial and you go, oh my God, how did they know that I wanted to be exposed to that message? Gee, I'm exactly the audience for that message. And as those magical moments, we want to find more of them using the tool of big data. The second tool that's available to us, and the exemplar comes from USA Touchpoints, is the ability to use mobile technology to follow around and to gain access to viewers' mind state at any given time. And so USA Touchpoint did an interesting thing. They basically took 2,000 people, they handed them the equivalent of an iPhone, and said, hey, every 30 seconds while you're awake, every 30 minutes while you're awake, we're going to ping you with a quick survey. And we're just going to ask some basic questions. Where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? What media are you consuming? And oh, by the way, what is your mood and what is your emotional state? And the neat thing is there's tons of ways of playing with this data. I'm going to give you one quick example. And what they did was they mapped the mood people that were in with the emotion that they were feeling. This is not a typical quad analysis. Don't worry about what quadrant you're in. It is the statistical relationship between the blue dots, which are the mood, and the red dots, which are the TV genres. And some interesting things occur when you look at it. First of all, you see that watching drama maps very closely to being exhausted. Now, this is not cause and effect. This is just correlation, unless, of course, you're talking about season 5 of Lost. But typically what we would assume is, wait a second, most dramas come on late at night at the end of the day, people are tired, and so that makes a lot of sense. Interestingly, both sitcoms and realities, and remember these dots, the red dots, the genres are not mapped to each other, they're mapped in relationship to the different mood states. It turns out that sitcom and reality end up in the same kind of mood space. And that is almost equidistance between a whole array of emotions. Indifferent, sad, overwhelmed, exhausted, contented, relieved. They sort of sit in the middle. And perhaps it suggests to us that these kinds of shows, easy to join in progress, easy to join from week to week, drop in and out, are panaceas that work across many mood states. And then documentaries sit almost exactly on top of relieved. My hypothesis is, oh, thank God, somebody's finally bringing the truth to light. For news, it sits right next to both interested and worried, and that seems to make a lot of sense. And then Jim Spaeth from USA Touchpoints, who heads up this initiative, pointed out, my favorite, of course, is that sporting events correlates very closely to being either really excited or really frustrated, which makes a whole lot of sense. I guess it depends on how well your team is doing. And so using mobile technology, we now have an opportunity to access people in the moment where they are, what they're doing, and how they're feeling, and then map it against a variety of information. So some great insights and an opportunity to catch the magic of the mood that people are in. So the last tool that I want to talk about is something we've been doing at the Disney Media Lab, where we've been looking at facial recognition. And what the goal of this is to really understand on a very granular level how people are thinking and feeling. And we actually have spent over 3 years working with vendors to come up with a system that could accurately and automatically encode the facial expression that people are making. And of all the different Ekman facial codings that are out there, smiling is the one that we've gotten to the level where we can automatically code this at a higher rate than what even the best experts can do. And what it allows us to do is remove a lot of ambiguity. When you deal with neuroscience, and you're going to see some presentations out there today, there's still a lot of room for interpretation. This part of the brain lit up, it means this, it's good or bad. So there's still a lot of things to be worked out. But with smiling, particularly when you're testing a situation comedy, you can connect the dots very clearly. We know the smile happened, we know it means happiness, and we know that when you're testing a sitcom, you want people to be in that state. And so what it creates actually is a series of new metrics for us. That in fact, what we have is smile velocity is going to be a new term we're going to be talking about. Smile velocity is just how fast and how powerful was that smile. And it starts off as a small little grin and it bursts into something larger. Another one is PTS, which normally has a very negative connotation for post-traumatic stress. But we want to turn it around, and we want to talk about percent of time smiling. And we can actually look at that, and we can compare one show to another and say, wait a second, these people were in this mind state for a much longer time than the others. And then another one I'm going to share with you is scene peak analysis. And this is the idea that it's not just how much time you spend smiling, but where you smile and how big does that smile become as you go into an individual scene. So let me walk you through a few of these. So we tested Modern Family against 2 other shows. One was a pilot, the other one was an episode 3 of a show. Both of those shows had not been seen a whole lot. Modern Family had already been on the air for a number of times. A couple things hit us. One, the order of magnitude of time spent smiling for Modern Family is huge. It's almost 10 times as much as the other guys. And one hypothesis, we still have to work this out, is that when you're watching a show you're already familiar with, you start to smile in an anticipatory way. You see that little Manny is going to come out, you know what Gloria is going to say. You start to get that grin on your face even before it happens, and it really raises the bar. We still have to go deeper into this. We are just at the beginning phases of it. But we saw that there was a significant difference in the time spent smiling between this show and the 2 ones we tested it against. This is a very complex graph, but what it shows is there's actually, we were collecting a variety of information. We used 3 different lines. The blue line is the dial. We handed them a dial, they turn it, they like it, they don't, you know, we're all familiar with that. And what it shows is quick interest and build and some peaks, but there's a latency to it, right? You're watching it and go, yeah, I like it, and you remember to turn the dial or you don't remember to turn the dial. And there's not that same granularity to it. And also, it's a very cognitive kind of thing. You're thinking, oh, I'm liking the show, so I better turn the dial. Versus, we have arousal, which is the ability to measure skin galvanization, how much attention and how much effort are people putting into what they're watching, which is the green line. And then the most jagged line of all is the red line. We're calling it, for now, the smile dial. And what it measures is how many people are smiling and to what degree, because you can have a more intense or less intense. And what we see is there's these big spikes that go on, and those spikes are really important because when you break it down and just look at the smile dial and break it down scene by scene by scene, what we see is that each scene has a peak point in which smiling occurs. And so you have those red bars that show where the peak is, and what we discovered was that with Modern Family, it was like looking at the Grand Tetons. There was a peak, next one, next one, next one, all sorts of stuff. When you compare this to one of the other shows, we saw was, yeah, the other show could get you to smile, it could get you to laugh, but it didn't peak, it didn't build, it didn't end on these big gaha kind of guffaw moments. And so clearly in this instance, Modern Family was the stronger of the two shows that were being tested here. What I'd like to share with you is actually a scene out of Modern Family, and what you're going to see, let me set it up and explain it. What you're seeing is the smile dial, and you will see a line, a curved line that goes up when more people are smiling more intensely, goes down when the smiling stops, and then goes back up. And what you want to focus on is, in the background is the actual show that's being tested, and there's two lines in between. And those two lines in between, those two bars, is a 2-second interval where we're mapping the smiling that's taking place to the scene that's unfolding. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Well, your strut shot, and we can't get parts for at least a day.
Fantastic. I don't suppose there's any place you can rent cars anywhere around here.
No, sir, we're not some one-horse town. Of course you can rent a car. It just happens to be out for the day.
Unbelievable. We're gonna miss the whole weekend.
I am sorry, Jay. I know how much you mean to those guys, and I know how much they want to see you. I'm so sorry.
Excuse me. You are so pretty. And if you really need to get somewhere, maybe I can help you out.
Yes, please, thank you. Anything.
Check it out. Stored it myself.
No. I did not get in the little plane at the little airport. I'm not gonna get in this flown by that guy that couldn't fix our car.
Gloria, it's either this or we're in the motel.
I don't like the sound of that. A lot of amenities disappear when an H becomes an M.
You know, when I met you, you were eating cereal out of a bucket.
So a couple of things. One, I don't know in a survey or in a focus group I'd necessarily say, oh yeah, I really laughed hard at that eating cereal in a bucket line. But with the facial coding, there is no socially correct response. It just is an automatic response that's happening to your face. The technique that we use doesn't require any wiring on the face. It is actually just cameras pointing at them, and so people are watching it in their natural environment. They're reacting to it the way they might react. And so what we've talked about so far are 3 different tools that let us get to some of those magical media moments. The magical media moment of big data connecting the right message with the right people. The mobile moment of connecting the mood with the media being consumed. And now this biometric facial coding metric. We looked at smiles in particular because we wanted to start to have a tool that could really be used for business decisions. We haven't deployed it yet for our program testing, but we likely will in the future as an augment to the other testing that we do. But also, we think that it could be very powerful to help us when we are cutting our promos for our shows. And so when we're looking at an entire episode, there may be big laughs, there may be big moments that are buried in there that we didn't capture with a regular dial, but we'll be able to capture with this. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to end by making the case that not only do we have these ways of thinking, but in fact, we need to move towards, with research, a final way of thinking, which is an integral, synthesized approach. One that uses the rational approach of science, but integrates it to uncover and understand mythical, magical, and archaic kinds of thinking and reactions. And to give you an example of that, I'll give you 3. The first one comes with Starbucks. And if you remember, back in 2007, Howard Schultz, who founded the company, wrote a memo to Starbucks basically saying, we've lost our way. And he gave a very specific example of where rational thinking overtook magical thinking. He said, when we went to the automatic espresso machines, we solved a major problem in terms of speed of service and efficiency. We used our rational science, we took metrics, we did testing, we discovered, wow, this is going to save us money and time and all that other stuff. But, he goes on to say, at the same time, we overlooked the fact that we would remove much of the romance and theater that was in play. It turns out those big espresso automatic machines, they block your sight line. You don't see the barista making the coffee. They encase the aroma of ground coffee. You walk in, you don't get that same feel. And they speed up the line to the point where you don't have sort of that morning ritual of getting into your day and doing your routine. And so it was an acknowledgement that rational thinking can take you too far if you're using it to only solve rational problems. You have to be solving those problems of the archaic, instinctual feel you want to have in a place, the magic you want to feel when you get that caffeine, that mythical power that you feel once you're awake and ready to take on the day and be the protagonist in your own lives. A second example of this, and we'll go back to our old way of surveying. By round of applause, how many of you have ever owned at one point in your life an iPod device? Okay. By a round of applause, how many of you have ever owned a Zune device? Okay, good. That's okay. Be proud. You checked it out. So here's the interesting thing, that when the Zune came out, at the time it came out, it was priced less expensively than the iPod. It had longer battery life, and it held more songs. So on a rational basis, it should have been a major choice for people to go to, but in fact, the market share really leaned towards the iPod device. And that's because Steve Jobs and the company understood that, yes, we use rational science to create the device, but we want to acknowledge all those other ways of thinking and feeling that human beings have. They want to feel an archaic, instinctual connection to it. It's got to feel good in their hands. They want to feel that it has magical powers, that just stuff happens that's cool. And they want it to be marketed in a mythical way that suggests that this is going to be a tool to empower somebody on their own journey as the protagonist in their lives. The final example I would give of why we need to be thinking about integral thinking and research comes from my own company. I would argue that nobody flies here down to Orlando or out to Anaheim to stand in the baking sun or the humidity to pay a premium to go visit the rational world of Disney. They want the magical world of Disney. They want the mythical, they want the instinctual, they want the wonderful world that hits them. And so I'll end with one final slide, and that is to say the good news for all of us in this room is that we don't have to look for car keys underneath the street lamp anymore. We have powerful new tools that allow us to go out, venture out into the dark where the interesting and exciting new insights lie. We have big data to help us get to those magical connections. We have mobile technology that allows us to map moods to media consumption. We have facial recognition and soon neuroscience to allow us to go and see when a mood shift actually occurs. I'm going to be around the next 2 days. Just look for me if you have any questions at all. And thank you very much for your time.